Good morning, Dog Nation. I'm Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp. We got so much to do today. It includes a great guest. Our buddy Terrence Edwards stops by here today. I've been a little critical of SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey in the past, but I think that he is perhaps on the verge of a big win. We need to celebrate that with him. We're also going to attempt, I was joking with our video audience that joins us live. I was joking with them a moment ago. We are going to attempt a very dangerous thing here today before the show is done. We are going to brush up against a topic that we never discuss on this show, but we're going to do it deftly and nimbly because that's what we do. There's also a pretty interesting rumor out there that we've briefly addressed before involving one Georgia coach. We'll take that head on again today. Prominent voice out there in the college football world is expressing some skepticism about Georgia on the football field this fall. Is that fair? We'll talk about that. And we have new details about just how extreme, the word we're using today, just how extreme the measures that Georgia might have to go to if it wants to win its next five-star recruiting battle. Does that sound like something you might be interested in? What do you say we start with that here right now? It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Merriweather and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. Find them online at georgiadivorceteam.com.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
There truly is no off-season. You know that. We've been saying that for 10 years. And yet today, perfect example of that. It is a Thursday in May, y'all, and we need like 2 hours, 2 shows perhaps, to get it all done here today. There is so much going on around college football, around Georgia, all of it interesting. And we're going to do our part to kind of get through as much of it as we can and keep a sort of a brisk pace operating here today. We'll let you judge us and see how well we do. Let me begin with this. Tuesday is going to be a big day around DawgNation once again as another five-star prospect gets ready to announce his commitment decision. This time it's the five-star offensive tackle Jackson Cantwell, which, as many of you know, despite the fact that quarterback is going to always get more attention, Cantwell is actually the higher-rated player between both Curtis and Cantwell. And with no disrespect to Jared Curtis, I mean, this is just as important as anything that happened with Jared Curtis. And in some people's eyes, hey, maybe Cantwell is just sort of projected to be the better player. You can say that without in any way kind of throwing – do people still say throwing shade? Without shading Jared Curtis. You can say that about Cantwell, certainly without meaning any disrespect towards Jared Curtis. Jackson Cantwell is a very, very, very big deal. You know that he's going to be on campus here at Georgia this weekend. And this was kind of the whole thing that started this whole fiasco as of late. And I mean fiasco in kind of a positive and complimentary sense here for a moment, which is that, I mean, it was supposed to be already done. Cantwell was supposed to have already announced his commitment pledge. And if he had done it on the original date, April 30th, I guess my assumption is, and I believe yours is too, that it wasn't going to be Georgia. Now, listen, I've had people who are smarter than me, which is a long list, tell me that maybe Georgia quietly was always more in this than maybe someone like me has given them credit for. I can only judge what I can see, and I think there was an element of the recruitment of Jackson Cantwell that's perhaps been just a little bit invisible. I think that's probably true. People have told me, Georgia was maybe in this more than you were giving them credit for. But nonetheless, that may have been true. I still think the overall assumption that if it had been April 30th, it was not going to be Georgia. I think that is conventional wisdom, probably well-founded, I think. But then lo and behold, Cantwell comes out and says, I'm not going to commit on April 30th anymore. And, oh, yeah, by the way, perhaps related, I'm also going to sneak in one more visit to UGA. I haven't seen him in a while. I haven't been on campus for a while. I want to go back and see Georgia for a minute. I want to do that the weekend here coming up, May 10th. Want to be there and be a part of that. And then you talk about, the floodgates opening around DawgNation. We're just, going crazy about what this could mean. The fact that Cantwell extends his recruitment, comes back to Georgia, and certainly whether it be sort of official reports, rumors and innuendo, something kind of in between the two. I mean, since then, there has been a lot connecting Georgia and Cantwell. Is it perhaps all a smokescreen? We're on guard for anything. Does this kind of end up with where it was before, with maybe the thought of whichever program is willing to be the biggest possible spender? Because, after all, Cantwell is represented by Drew Rosenhaus, probably the most famous of all the football agents, big, high-powered agent like this representing Cantwell. Clearly that's an attempt at maximizing financial value. I don't fault Cantwell for that. I don't fault anybody for getting theirs. But if you've got Drew Rosenhaus as your agent, then let's just be honest here. NIL is certainly a factor in your recruiting. And I think that maybe going back to April 30th, we thought, well, whoever the biggest bidder is, the highest spender, an Oregon or a Miami, that's the school that might get Jackson Cantwell. But now we're not quite so sure. All of a sudden now, with a big visit to Georgia coming up this weekend, and fresh off the heels of a five-star quarterback who was also thought to be a little bit of a pricey prospect, all of a sudden now, I think a lot of Georgia fans are saying, well, gosh, I guess just about anything might be possible. So with that in mind, I, probably just like you, tuned in last night to the terrific recruiting show we do each week here on DawgNation. It's called Before the Hedges, presented by Kroger. Our Kaylee Mansell and Jeff Sintel team up for that. And in discussing kind of the what's next for Jackson Cantwell, Jeff mentioned some of the stuff that he also wrote in a story for us at DawgNation.com about kind of where things stand now with the sort of four finalists for Cantwell. There are theoretically four hats on the table for this decision on Tuesday. Miami and Oregon, you've heard me mention. Georgia's one of these, and Ohio State is sort of in this too. So very much usual suspects, I guess, minus Texas, when it comes to the sort of big spending, aggressive recruiting programs here right now. All of them a factor in the recruitment for Cantwell. And when it comes to these four finalists and all of the, the spendiness of all of this, Jeff Sintel also gave us some more interesting information from Before the Hedges, presented by Kroger last night here on the DawgNation video channels. This is what Jeff Sintel had to say.
Here's what we've learned. We've learned that all four of those schools, Ohio State, Oregon, Georgia, Miami, are roughly offering Jackson the same amount of money. Pretty much marginalized there. So the money factor, while it will be extreme, is going to be level across the playing field. That's very interesting. He's going to see Georgia. It is an unofficial visit to Georgia this weekend. If he does choose Georgia, eventually, if he does choose Georgia, he will have an official visit in his back pocket as well.
So I like these moments when we kind of get to play like armchair detective here for a moment. So Jeff Sintel last night Before the Hedges says that according to what Cantwell has told him, that roughly all four of his finals, once again, Georgia, Miami, Oregon, Ohio State, all four of those finalists are offering roughly the same amount of NIL dollars. Not the same exactly, but within the ballpark, roughly the same. Okay, well, what does that mean? Well, outside of Jeff Sintel's reporting, we also have other national reporting on this that gives us a little bit more detail into this. And frankly, when it comes to stuff like this, now listen, I trust anything that Jeff Sintel writes because he's getting it straight from the source. But when it comes to the other stuff, it's not that I'm in any way distrusting. Honestly, I think a lot of these guys do great work. But when it comes to the overall sort of NIL world here, I am willing to believe anything, but I, for the most part, believe nothing. Are you with me on that? Are you kind of like me on this, where it's like, listen, we hear so much crazy stuff. I have become conditioned that anything could be true. But specifically, I'm not quite so sure anything we ever actually hear truly is true. So you do with this what you will. But Jeff Sintel says all four of the finalists, they're all offering roughly the same thing. Well, according to our friends at On3, I'll show you this on the screen. What they say is that Miami has the most lucrative first-year deal on the table for five-star offensive tackle Jackson Cantwell, sitting around the $2 million mark. So much so that they put the big, and they're sort of famous for this now, the big sort of ostentatious graphic with the $2 million there in the social media graphic. So According to Jeff, roughly the same money from all four schools. According to On3, the Miami number here is $2 million. What do you do with that? Is all of a sudden that's the kind of waters that Georgia's swimming in, where they do whatever it takes one of the five-star quarterback? And I know there's some reporting out there too that maybe Georgia got Jared Curtis at sort of a first-year discount. Maybe they did. It'd certainly be good news if they did. Once again, I'm willing to believe anything, but I actually believe nothing. Like, I'm not quite so sure any of this stuff is ever specifically true. It's only kind of, what was it that Obi-Wan said to Luke Skywalker, from a certain, manner of thinking or something like that. Some of this is sort of true depending on your perspective, I reckon. But nonetheless, maybe Georgia did get Curtis at a discount. Maybe that's what allows Georgia to be, kind of Miami-level aggressive and going to, as Jeff said, the extreme here on Jackson Cantwell. But we've got two interesting pieces of reporting. On3 says Miami's offering $2 million. Jackson Cantwell tells Jeff directly, the quote is in the story, that all four of his programs are offering roughly the same thing. So does that lead you to believe that Georgia's also, kind of in a world now where it's able to offer a incoming recruit like this $2 million for his first year on campus? We'll never know. We'll never know. All of this is just going to be sort of rampant speculation, but in all honesty, the speculation is a little bit fun. Now, as far, though, as kind of what that means, if Cantwell is convinced that money is pretty good wherever he goes, and with these four programs, you would assume it probably would be, what then? What does that do for the recruitment after that? Now, this is where I think this thing also gets a little bit interesting. Let me read to you directly from Jeff's story at DawgNation.com on that front. He says, I do know what I will make in college right now. He has, that idea. He says, the good thing about that for me is that it's very, very similar across all four teams among my finalists. That's the reason why Jeff goes on before the hedges last night and says what he said is because that's directly what Cantwell told him. This is not, sources close. This is the guy saying, yeah, they're basically all offering the same thing. So he says, because the money is relatively similar, it's not going to affect my decision then. Because honestly, all of them are so close where it can't really. In other words, if we kind of put the tea leaves here, if Miami's $2 million, then everybody else is pretty close to the same thing. So he says, therefore, money's not really a factor because the money's essentially the same, which I would say for more recruits than not sort of ends up kind of being true. Not always, but sometimes. So he says that's something that's not going to get in the way of that. I'm very glad to be compensated well. Good for him for being honest. I don't think anybody's ever complained about that. Anyone who has is a liar. I like this guy. He says, but I think, I'm just happy. I get to have the opportunity to make money playing the game that I love, just thinking that that's something that really cool about the modern age of college football. Now, I got to tell you, not everybody loves the way in which college football is evolving. I do get that. There's some parts of it that I'm really bothered by. Other parts of it I'm not that bothered by. I really don't care who gets paid what. That's never been that big of an issue to me. But in a day and age in which, some recruits go so far as to pretend they don't even know what NIL is, and you understand why they do, because when things go wrong, that's the first thing people sort of gravitate to. They grab hold of as a way of expressing their frustration. I get why recruits feel like they can't really be honest about it, but the fact that Cantwell can say, yeah, I'm happy to get compensated. It's kind of a cool thing. And, of course, who wouldn't want that degree of life-changing money? And I think the other thing that Cantwell kind of intimates in the story with Jeff is, well, if you got these four programs from four very different parts of the country for the most part who are offering roughly the same money, well, now I can make my decision on the basis of what really matters to me. Because the truth is, and adults understand this all the time, it's like, well, of course, the money you get paid for the job you do really matters, but the thing that you spend most of your life thinking about is not the actual money, it's the quality of life. And that's ultimately the thing that impacts your day-to-day happiness more so than the actual compensation. Any adult understands that. So now Cantwell can say, well, now that the money's relatively the same, what's the best fit for me beyond that? And that's what Georgia gets a chance to present to Cantwell here this week. And I'll also tell you in the last hour or so, you don't know who Bryant McKinney is, the famous former Miami offensive lineman. He's reached out publicly via X to Jackson Cantwell, making a very public pitch to Cantwell to come to Miami, and Cantwell has responded back, very kind there on all of that. It's kind of funny how active that Cantwell has been throughout this entire process, responding to McKinney and just really kind of being, there and about all of this, including, by the way, earlier this week when Jared Curtis was making his move. If we're going to say that a lot of this for Cantwell, since everybody's paying an extreme sum of money to get him, at least willing to pay that money, then ultimately it just kind of comes down to, well, where do you want to be? Well, this weekend, Cantwell gets a chance to sort of examine, how much would I like to be at the University of Georgia? And we have some evidence here that perhaps Cantwell would really like to be at UGA and really likes some of the stuff that is going on with the University of Georgia and its football program right now. I'm going to play another clip from Jeff that reveals, I think, two interesting pieces of information of just how interested Cantwell was in the decision that Jared Curtis made on Monday, including actually becoming a little intertwined with us here at DawgNation in the process. One more time from Jeff. This is really interesting.
Might be a first. Jackson Cantwell, I don't know if you know this, he was in the chat for our DawgNation commitment special for Jared Curtis. He was, maybe he just got home from school, he didn't want to study, but he was kind of hanging out in the chat. So some of you DawgNation people will be able to remember that. That was actually Jackson Cantwell in the chat. One other little nugget that we try to give you guys the real on Before the Hedges. He texted Kirby Smart before Jared Curtis' announcement. And he's like, Kirby, do you know what's going on here? Do you know what's going to happen?
Oh, my gosh.
Kirby said, yes, I do. But according to my information, Kirby did not tell him what. He just said, yes, I know what's going to happen here.
So there you go. Two things from Cantwell that I think are pretty interesting. A, the fact that he was in our live chat during the broadcast on Monday, watching along with you. Many of you maybe even interacting with Cantwell at the time and not knowing it was him. I think that's pretty interesting and an interesting revelation by Cantwell to Jeff Sentell. But then also kind of reaching out to Kirby, hey, do you know what Jared Curtis is about to do? And apparently Kirby not spilling the beans, at least we're told when it comes to Cantwell on that. So I don't know. Do with this what you will. It certainly sounds like right now he's watching the live chat. He's hanging out with fans. He's interacting with Kirby Smart, and he's coming to Georgia this weekend. It sounds like Jackson Cantwell sees a lot that he currently likes about Georgia. And according to reporting and according to Cantwell's own words, that Georgia, just like all the other three finalists, are all offering roughly the same amount of money. So, y'all, I think you're kind of right with me here on this. This sounds really fun, and this sounds really interesting, that suddenly a five-star prospect as recently as, like, say, 2 or 3 weeks ago, I didn't give Georgia any chance of getting. All of a sudden now they may really win this battle. They may be willing to go to the kind of extreme measures that Jeff's described to make sure they get it done, and pairing a guy like Cantwell with a guy like Jared Curtis. Now, of course, there's also a chance that a program like Miami, who, by the way, if you're following the transfer portal right now, they're just getting everybody in the portal. And I'm not quite so sure how many of these guys are game-changing players. But, I mean, they're cleaning left and right of whatever is in the portal. They're just getting it all right now. So I don't know that anyone at the moment is spending more money than Miami is, Texas, Oregon included. I don't know that anybody's spending more money than Miami is. So maybe ultimately they just keep raising the price, and maybe eventually with Drew Rosenhaus as his agent, maybe that's who wins. Or maybe Oregon, fresh off, frustration of losing Jared Curtis, maybe they strike back and get their revenge against Georgia here on this. As I said before, anything is possible. But if you're a fan, the only thing you can ask is to be right in the thick of it. And I got to tell you right now, Georgia is right in the middle of this recruiting battle. Big visit this weekend, decision on Tuesday. If you're a Georgia fan, I'd stay tuned to see what happens next. My name is Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather & Tharp. We are glad you're with us, whether it's live on video 10 a.m. Hey, who knows? Maybe Jackson Cantwell's watching right now. We have a history of that around here, apparently. Or on demand after the fact. Of course, we appreciate that. Really, the majority of the people who watch the show watch it after the fact, which means I don't always get to personally interact with them. But as I, say, I'm eternally grateful that you would spend some time with us. Of course, Radio Noon, Athens Sports Radio 960, The Ref podcast, all those platforms, including, by the way, We recently made kind of a shift in our hosting service, which y'all don't care about. That's boring stuff. Still there on SoundCloud, too. We had a few folks after the move were like, hey, we still listen directly on SoundCloud every day, which we were happy to keep supporting that, too. So, I think the one thing that we're committed to around here is many platforms as we can, whatever works for people, as long as we can make it happen. We'll try to blast this thing out a bunch of different ways. And thankfully, a lot of you still seem to be able to find the show on a daily basis. I am really, really grateful for all of that. And a big thanks to our friends at Merriweather and Tharp who make today's show possible, too. Of course, your source for Georgia divorce. And y'all, nobody likes divorce. It's a hard, tough thing, the idea of it anyway. But in some cases, it's an unavoidable next step for perhaps you in your life. And in some cases, it could be the pathway to a happier next season of your life. Listen, that's ultimately what it's all about, right? Maximizing your time, getting as much enjoyment as possible out of the seasons that life provides for you. And maybe you've kind of tried all the options and considered all the possibilities, and this is just it. This is going to happen one way or another. And so we would suggest, if that is the next step for you, then you owe it to yourself to plan well, to put a pathway in place to give you the things that you feel like you need and the positive resolution, as much of a positive as it can be when all of this is said and done. That's what our friends at Merriweather and Tharp take very, very seriously. They're your source for Georgia divorce. And they think about all the options for you on this because they've been through this thousands of times with other clients with perhaps similar stories to yours. And in doing so, you develop a kind of an institutional knowledge and an institutional memory about this that can be kind of put to work for you in your situation, too. You want to trust people who've been through this a lot, a very experienced team, good folks that are stretched all across the state of Georgia now, office all across the state. They can help answer your questions, have that initial consultation. They can even give you some kind of clever ideas to sort of manage, which is maybe one of the biggest questions you have is, how much is this going to cost me? What is the sort of cost certainty I can get as I go through the divorce process? Well, they've got some pretty clever ways to do that that have been really well received by their clients. So I want you to reach out online. It's GeorgiaDivorceTeam.com. GeorgiaDivorceTeam.com. Merriweather and Tharp is your source for Georgia divorce. All right, we're going to get Terrence Edwards here coming up in a moment. Always fun on a Thursday to get a chance to speak to him. Prior to that, I want to go around the doghouse. And it's presented today by our friends at Daytona Beach, which I'm thrilled about. One of the things we talked about yesterday was the updates to a lot of these way too early top 25s that the various national media outlets do. We think stuff like that's fun. Anything that gives us an on-ramp to having a college football conversation, we think it deserves a right to exist. And so we're here for all of the way too early top 25s and things like that. And it was interesting upon discussing yesterday that while, you had CBS had Georgia 5th, I want to say somebody else had Georgia 6th. Our guy Joel Klatt from Fox Sports, a little bit of an SEC skeptic sometimes. Our guy Joel Klatt only had Georgia 8th in his preseason poll. Now, in discussing this on his podcast, The Joel Klatt Show, one of the things that Klatt said was his initial intuition was to rank Georgia a little higher than 8th. And admittedly, he said, I'm not 100% sure that I know what I want to do with Georgia. But ultimately, he only put them 8th, which I would say for Georgia is a little low. I think you'd probably agree with that. I don't know that any of us think that Georgia should be the preseason #1 team. But 8th, I think to many of us feels a little bit low. But Klatt on his show, and listen, I think that Joel Klatt, you can say what you want about anybody, I guess, but I think that Klatt knows football. And so therefore I do, even if I don't always agree with what Joel Klatt says, and I do think he kind of comes from a sort of non-SEC point of view and strains himself to find the non-SEC opinion sometimes. I don't dispute that Klatt knows football, and so therefore what he says is always interesting, even if it's contrary to the sort of conventional wisdom we perhaps follow around here. But nonetheless, Klatt going into more detail on his podcast about why he's a little skeptical of Georgia, and a lot of this centering around on the brand-new quarterback, Gunnar Stockton. Take a listen to this.
Think about the standard at Georgia right now. They won 11 games, won the SEC, and yet the season was a giant disappointment because they didn't win the national championship. That's where Kirby Smart has put Georgia. And you can't go to the quarterfinals and lose to Notre Dame and it be a success at Georgia. unfortunately for Kirby. So Kirby is going to turn at quarterback to Gunnar Stockton. It's his show. There's a lot of opinions about Gunnar Stockton. Oh, he played great in that matchup against Texas in the SEC championship and did serviceably, and and against Notre Dame, was it okay? Here's the deal. This is a team that I think is going to have to win because their roster is better than other rosters. Gunnar Stockton might turn out to be a really quality player. Have I seen that yet? Again, I don't know.
I don't have a huge problem with anything that Joel Klatt says there, including what he says at the end about Gunnar Stockton. I would say it's just a reasonable assumption or a reasonable conclusion to say, gosh, we don't really know how good Gunnar Stockton is going to be this year. Now, when you look at the track record of quarterbacks in the Kirby Smart era, I think it gives you some parameters around the discussion. And we've had sort of seemingly wildly different quarterbacks starting for Georgia at various times. But statistically, they're all actually fairly close to what their performance looks like on the field. They're statistically a little closer than you perhaps think, even though, our discussions about these guys is sometimes so different. The actual performance is not always as different as you might assume. So I do believe there are some reasonable parameters you might put around Stockton's performance. But given the fact that we haven't seen him play yet, it is totally reasonable to say I'm not really quite so sure what Georgia's going to get. I also think that the other stuff that Klatt says there is also pretty reasonable too. That the ultimate story for Georgia here this year is going to be told about what the rest of the roster does. And that's perhaps, I think, the most important point of all, which is that if the only question facing Georgia for this upcoming season is how good Gunnar Stockton is going to be, well, at that point in time, you can probably go ahead and assume that Georgia's going to win the national championship. And the truth is, I don't think that's the only question about how good Georgia's going to be. They've attempted to upgrade at wide receiver. Is that actually going to pan out? We believe they could be better at the offensive line just through sheer force of will. Does that actually work out that way? They're going to try to upgrade their running game. Does that actually happen? Perhaps a little bit of a return to form for the defense. Kirby during the spring, as he said, they harped on stopping the run. Georgia kind of, top 30 or worse in that the last 2 years. We assume that might get better. So there are, I would say, bigger questions for Georgia than quarterback. But if you kind of answer all of those for the positive and the only thing left is Gunnar Stockton, then you might as well print the T-shirts. And the reason why I feel that way is this. And this is one of the reasons why I kind of got a little bit frustrated with Mike yesterday, is that it is just a misbegotten notion that Gunnar Stockton's job in 2025 is going to be to take this Georgia football program, put it on his shoulders, and carry Georgia wherever it goes. Georgia's not going to ask that of Gunnar Stockton. And if you look around college football right now, that is just not really what anybody is asking from their starting quarterback. Things just kind of go in ebbs and flows, and they just sort of go in cycles. And right now, we are not in the cycle of the superstar quarterback winning national championships in college football. Could that change at any moment? I reckon it could. But let's just open up our eyes and pay attention to what's actually happening. Joe Burrow in college football was 6 years ago now. And we don't have really much of a Joe Burrow presence in this sport since then. What did we say a few days ago? The reigning national championship quarterback was a 6th-round draft pick. Do you think that Gunnar Stockton could play at a 6th-round draft pick level for Georgia? History would suggest that the Georgia quarterback will at least play that well. Now, there's also been examples of, at least a brief example, when that wasn't quite so true. Dwan Mathis began the 2020 season for Georgia. He wasn't at that level, but that's like the counterexample against the rest of the evidence where Georgia's quarterback play is usually at least at the level of a 6th-round draft pick. And if Gunnar Stockton can give you that level of performance again, and who knows, he may be far better than that. But typically speaking, Georgia at least gives you a quarterback performance, whether it's Jake Fromm or Stetson Bennett or, whatever else, at least gives you a level of quarterback play that's equivalent to the sort of late-round NFL draft pick. And by the way, even Carson Beck, who was just raking in millions of dollars a year ago and driving around in somehow 2 Lamborghinis or whatever else that was. Do you know how Carson Beck, for the most part, played at Georgia? Roughly equivalent to a mid to late round draft pick. Last year for Georgia, 7.8 yards per attempt. Do you think that Gunnar Stockton can exceed 7.8 yards per? And by the way, when people say, well, there's the drops and stuff like that, I'm not trying to diagnose why it happened, and I'm not putting all the blame on this for Beck. I'm just saying this is the performance that Georgia got at quarterback last season. For all the reasons that occurred, this is the reason why. Could Gunnar Stockton be 7.8 yards per attempt this year? Could he be even slightly better than that? 28 touchdown passes from Beck last year. Only 24 the year before, by the way, but 28 last year. Could Gunnar Stockton be at least that good, if not slightly better? I certainly think he could. Beck threw 12 interceptions a year ago. Could Stockton throw fewer than that? Once again, we're establishing reasonable expectations for Gunnar Stockton. Not, he's the next Stetson Bennett Heisman finalist or the next, Joe Burrow or whatever else. Just a little bit better than Georgia had a year ago. Do you know how much of a difference a little bit better than Georgia was a year ago when it won the SEC? Do you know how much of a difference a little bit better would make? A little bit better. Especially if the other areas we just mentioned, offensive line and wide receiver and everything else, especially if that stuff is a little bit better. Do you know how much a little bit better, a few key areas, how much that can mean and matter for Georgia here this year? We think quite a bit, worth considering. And that is Around the Doghouse, presented today by our friends at Daytona Beach. And, of course, we think, by the way, speaking of fun stuff, getting ready for the upcoming fall, before you get there, really important this time of year to enjoy yourself some vacation time. Our friends at Daytona Beach are all about that. Great time to visit. Gorgeous 23 miles of shoreline. International airport gets you right there to it. Super convenient. Great restaurants. You love golf. You love fishing. You love just being out at the beach. Gorgeous beach. Grew up going there. Some of my best memories, Main Street Pier, Ponce Inlet Lighthouse, all the delicious restaurants. I'm just telling you right now, it's a wonderful place for you to go. And of course, you know it for the International Speedway and kind of the Great American Race, but it's not the only thing that Daytona is well known for. And when you visit, you'll find that out yourself. So I want you to check out this website. It's DaytonaBeach.com/hotel deals. DaytonaBeach.com/hotel deals for more on that today. All right, before we're done, big rumor involving a Georgia coach. We'll give you the latest information on that and a whole lot more. But for now, let's keep the conversation going. Our guy, Terrence Edwards, here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Let's bring on Terrence Edwards here. And Terrence, I want to keep the conversation going here because one of the things I think is that there's a little bit of a misunderstanding about what Georgia perhaps needs from Gunnar Stockton this year. Listen, Gunnar Stockton may go on to be a great quarterback for Georgia. Obviously, I hope that he does. But I don't know that Georgia needs Gunnar to be great in order for the team itself to be great. They just need Gunnar to be good. And good, in my mind, would be slightly better than Beck was a year ago, a little closer to what maybe Will Howard was for Ohio State in a national championship season in 2024 as well. Those, to me, are reasonable benchmarks that, as I mentioned, if the only question you have about Georgia is how Gunnar Stockton is going to perform, well, that means that Georgia's in pretty good shape because I would say there are far bigger issues for Georgia than whatever Gunnar settles into be. And I think it's interesting how much misunderstanding there kind of is about that. Where would you come down on a discussion like this?
I'm with you on that. I think Gunnar has to play at a level that he doesn't turn the ball over and he doesn't put Georgia in a predicament that he is the reason why we lost. I think the supporting cast has to play better as well. So as long as the supporting cast give Gunnar the opportunity to play clean football and we don't have the drops, we don't have just the inconsistent play for the offensive line, the running game comes along. If everybody else pick up their level of play, then I think Gunnar would be just fine.
Yeah, I mean, let me kind of give another stat here that sort of proves this point. Like, think about different quarterbacks that Georgia's had. Beck the last 2 years, a lot of fanfare and attention around him. You know, he was thought to be a big NIL guy. You know, Stetson Bennett before that, a little bit of a, guy that was maligned at first, became a huge fan favorite before his time at Georgia was done. and the sort of steady presence of Jake Fromm prior to that, which would maybe is described as sort of three very different quarterbacks. But let's just look at something like, say, touchdown passes thrown. Carson had 28 last year, 24 the year before that. In 2 years of Stetson Bennett, he had 27 and 29. In 2 years of Jake Fromm, we're skipping 2020 because that was not a full season. Go back to Jake Fromm in 2019 and 2018. It's 24 touchdown passes. It's 30 touchdown passes. Like, all these quarterbacks for Georgia, wildly different personalities, wildly different perceptions on the part of fans. But the actual stat lines are not crazily different in the Kirby Smart era. And so, therefore, my guess is how many touchdown passes will somebody like Gunnar Stockton throw this year? Probably somewhere between 24 and 30, because that's what the last, 6 years of quarterback play for Georgia have kind of been. I mean, doesn't that seem to make some sense?
It does. I think that's kind of the standard that we've set. I think anyone would take those numbers. That is very productive numbers. But I just think as a team and as a whole, we can't put Gunnar in a predicament where we're leaning on him to be the reason why we've winning the game. And I want him to be the reason why we're not losing. So that's where I kind of stands. And everyone around.
Did we lose Terrence? All right, I think Terrence dropped out. We'll see if we can get him back here. We'll certainly appreciate his time. But, you like the point that he's making. I love that, where he says, I want to be the reason you're not losing. I don't need my quarterback to be the reason I'm winning games. I just want to be the reason we're not losing, which I think is well said, and certainly the mindset of a coach to say that. Terrence, I'll allow you to finish your point there, because I think you're making a good one about exactly what Georgia does need from its quarterback.
Right, and I think if you just look at Stetson 2 years, I think he wasn't the reason we won the national championship his first year. I think he was a part of the reason. But I think the second year, he was the big reason we won the national championship his first year. So I just want Gunnar to go in there and be able to play mistake-free football. I know there will be mistakes. There will be interceptions. There will be a lot of things that go wrong. But we need to limit those mistakes from the quarterback position. And I just need him to be the leader that he needs to be to galvanize this whole team to play better. And I think that's what we missed last year.
Speaking of quarterbacks, what was your reaction to Jared Curtis's commitment to Georgia here this week? How much have you seen Curtis, and what do you think about him as a player?
I haven't seen a lot of him. I've seen kind of clips on the internet, but he has the tool to be an elite quarterback. He has the size, he has the arm strength, he has the mobility. And I, for one, don't mind him coming from a smaller private school, because we all know that playing a quarterback at that level is about retaining information. It's about how quickly you can process information. Things will move a lot faster, but I think when you can play, you can play. And that's what I look at, and I think this kid could play.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we sometimes forget is, like, I think I've talked about this before. You watch the NFL, like the big, strong-arm quarterback, that doesn't always mean I'm going to throw the ball 40 yards down the field. There aren't a lot of plays in the NFL that are kind of designed to do that. But when you can just whip it to the sideline and to have the strength to get into tight windows and some of the shorter throws, I mean, that's where I think you have a chance to really feast in the college game. That Curtis's arm strength is not just for those sort of Hail Mary opportunities maybe late in the game when you're kind of desperate. It's also the ability to sort of sling it into a tight window, too. I mean, I think sometimes this arm strength is going to show up in some of the shorter throws as much as anything.
Yes, I think so. I think the arm strength you would see it in the intermediate throws, the 15-yard digs or the 18-yard comebacks, where it just gets out there very quickly and on the rope. That's where you can see the arm strength. I just think a lot of the other short passes, it got to have some form of touch. Deep pass, it got to have some form of air up under the ball to put it so the receiver have the ability to run up under the football. But whenever you could throw those 15-yard digs or 18-yard comebacks from the opposite hash, that's when you see the arm strength comes into play.
So obviously we don't know. Certainly I don't know. But to me, I mentioned this yesterday, that the story with Curtis feels a little bit like a continuation of what we also saw from Georgia, kind of 2025 recruiting class, transfer portal, where, I mean, I think pretty clearly they know they need offensive improvement. And it's not even about like, well, you blame Bobo for it, or you blame the drops, or you blame the whatever. I don't know that you blame anybody. I just think you look at the overall stat line and say, okay, this probably needs to be better than it was. And to me, Terrence, it certainly seems like Georgia's plan for improving its offense is about being as aggressive as possible, about bringing in as much talent as you can. Best receivers we've probably ever seen collectively Georgia sign in a high school class in 2025. Zachariah Branch and Noah Thomas, the transfer portal guys, my gosh, they're generating tons of buzz. And to me, it almost feels like Curtis and then whoever comes to Georgia after Curtis here in 2026 in the cycle, it seems like this sort of a continuation of that, where they looked around and said, to win a national championship, we probably have to be a little bit more prolific offensively than we've been. And so, therefore, let's go out and get as high a level of personnel as possible, and let's see if we can get that offensive improvement that way. It seems like a reasonable strategy, and to my mind, that sort of feels like what Georgia's doing here. Would you agree with that? Is that something you feel like you've seen too?
I just think you have to go out and get the best players possible.
Mm-hmm.
Players make coaches look better than they actually are. Bill Belichick, I think, is one of the best coaches ever. And just see how when the quarterback left and the talent left out of New England, how things went with him. So stockpiling talent is the way to go. You got to go and get players that fits what you're going to do schematically. You have to go and fit players that fits the Georgia culture. And every player don't have to be Jeremiah Smith out of Ohio State, but you do have to have the adequate talent to go out and compete on the highest level with the best teams out there. And going to get a 6'6" receiver out of Texas A&M, man, that helps. Getting Kobe Young back, you saw what he was able to do in the spring game. That's going to help Gunner. Zachariah Branch with his return ability and his ability to work out the slot. C.J. Wilder, talent. We have stockpiled a lot of offensive firepower. And I think this is collectively, I think this is one of the better groups that we've had in a while.
No, I think that's interesting. What do you make of, and listen, once again, I'll admit, nobody really knows exactly what's going on here. I think we have suspicions, but no one knows for sure. But when you get the commitment of a guy like Curtis beating out Oregon to get him, Oregon quickly pivots to another five-star quarterback, so they're clearly being aggressive, trying to bring somebody in. And now, Georgia's sort of on to Jackson Cantwell, the five-star offensive tackle. We do have at least some on the record reporting about what it might cost to bring a guy like that in. I think the perception on the part of many fans, I would say I'm in this group too, is that, boy, it seems like Georgia is, kind of out there in these sort of NIL, recruiting battles in a way that I don't know that Georgia's always been as aggressive in. That's the perception that exists right now. How true do you think that is, that all of a sudden now, hey, maybe Georgia's just throwing around, similar dollar figures to a lot of these like Miami and Oregon's and some of these sort of big spending programs. If Georgia's beating them for this kind of recruit, then a lot of Georgia fans assume, well, Georgia must be spending just as much as they are right now.
Like I said, I have no clue what they're doing money-wise. But if we're in it and we're able to sign some of these top players, we're doing something just like everyone else is doing. So however you want to believe what we're doing something. I just know a lot of these kids are going to the money. So if Georgia can be competitive with the money, they know that they're going to be, those players and family knows they're going to be competitive on the field. Just look at all the draft picks Kirby's had in his 10 years at Georgia. So if we could be competitive in a ballpark with NIL, those families know that they're going to get developed and possibly get drafted. So those are two things that Georgia do have going for them, that we could be competitive with the NIL, but you're also going to get developed at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, and we'll finish this topic by bringing that up. You used the word competitive. I mean, that's all it kind of has to be, right? It's like, you don't have to be the absolute highest bidder. In often cases, whoever the exact highest bidder is, maybe that's just coming from a place of desperation. But if you're at least competitive, all of a sudden now you can sell everything else you have to offer. The great lineage of success for guys going to the NFL, the culture around the program, just the day-to-day quality of life, that if you're at least competitive on the monetary part of it, then all the other stuff that benefits, your program, a lot of that comes into fuller focus, doesn't it?
Right. I mean, I saw some numbers on the internet with the tackle that Miami is going to offer $2 million. Just throwing a hypothetical. Now, if Georgia offered 1.5, like what can I could do the exact same thing with 1.5 that I could do with 2 million. Now, what's after that? What's important after that? Is it development? It's winning. It's a culture. So now all the things that used to be important comes into play after the monetary value gets settled. Now it's everything else that has been in play since college football has been around.
No, I think that's right. Let me finish with this. We're obviously back at that time of year. I'm very thrilled to be a part of the Georgia High School Football Hall of Fame. Terrence, obviously you're a member of the Georgia High School. You're really a charter member of the Georgia High School Football Hall of Fame. We're voting on this year's class, and I know you're as much of an advocate of anybody for your brother Robert, who obviously is going to get my vote, and I believe a lot of others too. So I just wanted to mention that to you because I know you love making a case for your brother and you support your brother as much as anybody else does. We're going to have a brand new class of the Georgia High School Football Hall of Fame coming out very soon, and a really good chance another Waco guy shows up on that list in the case of Robert Edwards. And Terrence, as someone who already has his blue code, I know you'll be as happy about that as anybody if that does indeed come to pass.
I'm probably even happier because I know as a high school player, I was in the 6th grade watching him play quarterback, play receiver, play running back, play outside linebacker, play safe. Like he didn't come off the field, and just the plays that he made in high school is just what memories are made. Like I can remember against Greene County, 3 interceptions, 3 touchdowns. Against Villarica, ask Brandon Tolbert what Robert did against Villarica in the semifinals. He made a catch on the sideline, and back then in overtime, it was penetration. Who has the most yards gained? And Robert hit a streak down the sideline, toe tap in, and won the game off that catch. Just like his impact as a senior in high school was just it was off the chain. Then go and be the last Georgia signee in his recruiting class, then being the best player in that class, being drafted in the first round as the 18th pick. Man, I mean, just everything that he went through with his injuries, and then he overcame those to be the man he is today. He is undoubtedly what Georgia high school is all about. And it'd be a shame if he doesn't get in this year.
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think it's a strong case, and I love the stories. I love the connection you feel to your high school program. Obviously, Robert's the coach at Washington County now, which I think is awesome. He's doing a great job. He's been a terrific coach for a long time. Terrence, thanks for those stories. And by the way, for people who want more of you online, I know you're busy with your own program right now, spring practice, things like that. So there's not a lot of bubble work and off-season work going on for the Terrence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy. But you're also on social media talking football all the time. So for people who want to connect with you, how can they do so?
Yes, on all social media platforms, you can find me at Terrence Edwards Wide Receiver Academy. And after spring practice, may not be the bubble work, but you can reach out to me to continue training. So I will have some sessions after spring practice is over.
It's great to hear, Terrence. Thanks for your time. We'll look forward to talking to you soon.
Thank you.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
I tell you, man, I love to set Terrence up to talk about stuff like that because Terrence so proud of his family, and he should be. We all should be, but in Terrence's case, from a football standpoint, of course you would be. Robert, great player, terrific coach, and it's one of the things like, football is obviously a huge part of our lives, and one of the reasons why I love my connection to football and sharing football with my own family. It's just how much, and I know this sounds corny, and I'm a corny guy. I'm sorry, I just am. But football reinforces family so well. Like you watch a lot of football, you just see constant reminders of the importance of family within football, and I just love that. I think that's just really good stuff from Terrence Edwards. I could sit there and talk about those old stories all day long. Really fun stuff. The good news is new stories, though, around here being made each and every year when it comes to the great experience that we have traveling together on our DawgNation cruise. We just got back. We're still kind of basking in the glow of all of that. And when we go in 2026, it's going to be a brand new experience, unlike anything anyone's ever had before. The Royal Beach Club in Paradise Island, the Bahamas, is about to debut. And when we were sailing there the other day, it's right there. Many of you have been on a cruise vacation before, so you kind of know the port there in Nassau. When you sail into the port, like right there kind of at the port, just a short kind of boat ride away from where the ship lands, it's going to be the brand new Royal Beach Club. And it's going to be exclusively for those on a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. And y'all, I'm telling you, this is going to be a game changer. Paradise Island's a beautiful beach there in Nassau. We love that. And now you're going to have a chance to experience in a way you've never experienced it before. And by the time we go on our DawgNation cruise next year, it's going to be open. It's actually going to be open by December here of this year. So I've been encouraging you, think about your Royal Caribbean cruise vacations and sort of a long-range planning situation. We're in May. Be thinking about late 2025. Be thinking about early 2026. Be thinking a year from now. You'll get the best overall price. You'll have the largest stateroom inventory to select from. Royal Caribbean is sailing at essentially 100% occupancy on every one of its ships, and like 90% of its occupancy the rest of the year has kind of already been sold out. So you've got to think ahead on stuff like this. And our friends at Royal Caribbean have got all kinds of new, fun, exciting things to debut to get you ready for it, including this gorgeous new Royal Beach Club. So let Jessica Slater tell you all about it. You may have been to Nassau before, but you've never been to Nassau like this, exclusively for those on a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. Give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. Email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. She'll tell you all about it and get you ready to go to the brand new Royal Beach Club, Nassau in the Bahamas, debuting late 2025, in place for our DawgNation cruise this time next April. All right, let's get ready to go cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean for a moment. Two really interesting stories I want to hit here. And then before we're done, interesting rumor involving a Georgia coach. We have information about that directly from the source, but also some speculation that still lingers. All of that here is coming up before we're done today, too. We told you we were very, very busy. Let me start, though, by saying that in recent months, last couple of years, I've been a little bit critical of SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey, and I think, in my opinion, at times with good reason. I haven't loved every decision that Sankey has made, and I'm not quite so sure I love the direction that the SEC is moving in all regards. However, we're also fair and balanced here. When good things happen, we're more than happy to tout it for what it is. And there was reporting from The Athletic that ESPN isn't perhaps now willing to pony up a good bit of additional revenue in exchange for the SEC adding a 9th conference game. Now, let me say several things about this in sort of quick succession. First of all, I think this is great by the SEC. I think that they needed a 9th conference game, but they would have been foolish to do it without additional money from ESPN. And ESPN tried to, at least the best we can tell, kind of drive a hard bargain on this to say, well, we've already given you your TV contract. We don't have additional money. They did offer prorated dollars for adding Texas and Oklahoma, but that didn't increase the per-team payout. And the SEC, I think, has equally tried to drive a hard bargain of, well, now that we've got this, these 2 additional teams, we can provide you additional revenue, but we are going to ask you to pay for it. And if you're not willing to pay for it, then we're not going to do it. And I do think it's been real. And we've followed this at the spring meetings in Destin, which usually take place kind of around Memorial Day last few, years. There has not been a lot of schedule agreement on the part of the SEC. Some wanted 8. I think some have wanted 9. Like, there has been some real disagreement. But I do think the natural skepticism that some programs in the SEC have had about moving to a 9th conference game, I think that the SEC has leveraged that well to now, it looks like, at least on the basis of the reporting by The Athletic, be in position to get more money from ESPN. I think it's an additional $5 million per team or something like that. I may be wrong with the exact numbers, but it's sizable to play the additional conference game. And this matters because there was reporting from USA Today this week that the Big Ten's per school payout to its legacy members is higher than what the SEC teams are getting this year, pretty significantly so. And the overall revenue generated by the league, now they do have 2 additional teams, and they have some teams that don't quite get the same equal share because they're newer. But the Big Ten's making more money than the SEC is right now, and money does matter. And so anything you can do to get more money, you probably should. And this is the SEC, I think, successfully doing that. Now, let me also tell you a couple of reasons why I think this is good for fans. First of all, if you go and look, and I don't have this chart to show you, but you can find this pretty easily. Go and look at, in any given year, like the 10 highest rated games in all of college football. Now, you're always going to have, like, say, a Michigan, Ohio State. You are. But a lot of the rest of the stuff is like Georgia, Alabama, Georgia, Texas. I mean, a lot of these are SEC games because I think most of us, you're probably like me. To me, it's just a more entertaining brand of the sport. I mean, it's just more entertaining. I am glued to my set watching, Alabama, South Carolina, like we did. We just picked a game. I'm glued to my set watching that in a way that I just don't feel the same way about these other leagues and these other games. So more of this kind of inventory is better. And if it comes to the expense of, Georgia's got in future years these non-conference matchups with like Florida State and more with Clemson and some of the Ohio State and like Louisville. And if these games never take place because the SEC is playing more conference games, some of you disagree and you have every right to your point of view. But for me, I would say that's a pretty good trade-off. Would I rather play LSU more frequently than I play Clemson? I think I probably would. Would I rather play LSU some as opposed to playing Florida State or Ohio State at all in the regular season? I think I probably would. Now, if you want to get into, well, should Georgia be playing Georgia Tech every year? That's a different discussion. But I think that the best football games we see in a given year are the games involving SEC versus SEC competition. So from that standpoint, I think this is a very good thing. Here's the other thing, too. We had a very convoluted conclusion to our season this past year. The tiebreaker scenarios for who made the SEC championship and who didn't, they were just sort of nonsensical. Now, it worked to Georgia's benefit, but it didn't make a ton of sense. And for a while, we were being told, and Lane Kiffin was like the most prominent voice saying this, well, maybe you don't want to be in the SEC championship. Well, I think we saw the committee, the playoff selection committee, provide a pretty strong, response to that by greatly valuing the teams that made the conference championship game. Texas got treated very kindly after having lost the SEC championship. Not the only time last year. They got favorable treatment, by the way. But that what the committee showed you is they do put additional value based on the seeding a year ago on teams that make their conference title game, even though the pathway for how you get there is a fairly convoluted tiebreaker that I don't know that people put all that much thought into. And when you've got 16 teams only playing 8 conference games, that's a lot of teams that don't play each other, which just kind of creates a mess at the end of, well, how do you compare South Carolina to Georgia when they didn't play, or, Texas to any of these teams when Texas literally somehow managed to play every team but Georgia? How do you make those comparisons? Well, with a 9th conference game, all of a sudden now it becomes a little more difficult to give Texas a cupcake schedule every year. And the sort of lack of head-to-head matchups against the teams that are at the top of the league, you're just going to have fewer of those. That the process of determining who your 2 best teams are and who should go to the conference title game and who should make the playoff, I do think the additional conference game streamlines that a little bit more. If this is where we're heading, more money for the league, better games for the fans, more sensible postseason scenarios, I think it's a win on all fronts. I'm very much in favor of this. Now, I joked with our video audience before our show began today. We are going to attempt to do something dangerous here for a moment. We don't ever talk about politics around here. I'm a very politically minded person, to be honest with you, but, the same way that if I was having dinner with you in your home, I'm not going to vomit out every opinion I have on every single subject because I have respect for you. Whether you're like me or not, I just have respect for my fellow humans. And the experience of listening to a podcast or watching a video is a pretty intimate experience. Many of you have earbuds inside your ears. That's a pretty intimate experience. And so therefore, we never want to do anything that would wear out our welcome. And so that's why we, at all costs, avoid politics. I would say to the extent we've had success, one of the reasons we've had success around here is that we sort of stay in our lane and do a pretty good job of doing that. But we're going to do something dangerous here for a moment. I am going to mention the fact that the president seems to want to put a commission together to study the future of college athletics. I think this is a big enough deal that we have to talk about this. And different people have different feelings about elected officials, but most of us all agree that we want a future for college athletics. So let's view this from that lens here for a moment. The president apparently wants Nick Saban to be on this. You know the big money bags booster from Texas Tech, and I'm sorry, I don't know his name. I should. I just don't. The money bags booster from Texas Tech who's helped them, spend so much money this year on NIL and bringing a lot of guys in the transfer portal. Apparently he's going to be on this as well. At least that's the rumors and reports. Ross Dellinger's had a lot of this at Yahoo. Others have reported on this as well. I think this is a pretty big deal. And I think that I'm pretty optimistic here that something good could come from this. Not because so-and-so politician's going to save the day. This is not – I really don't think that's what this is. But I do think – we talked about this the other day around the Nico Iamaleava situation, that when Nico did what he did, Tennessee wanted the public to know what had happened. And our read on that is that Tennessee believed the public was on their side. And what we said was, hey, put a pin in this for right now. That public opinion shapes a lot of things about how the future operates. And that if public opinion is becoming recognized as this has gone too far, then something good could come from this. And I do think, the movement that we're seeing right now is related to the understanding on the part of people who would have the power to potentially initiate change, that the public would like to see college athletics preserved. Now, specifically, what do I mean by that? I think there are some people who assume that they're going to swoop in and they're going to put a cap on the expenditure. For instance, so-and-so team that's just buying all of its players, we're going to put an end to that. I don't believe that's what this is. I really don't. And the fact that the Texas Tech guy, if you followed the transfer portal and the NIL stuff this offseason, like Texas Tech has made some pretty big moves. And if you're not super into this, Texas Tech seems like a barely a blip on the radar. But in the NIL space this year so far, they've been as much of a spender as almost anybody for all kinds of like monetary related reasons. So the presence of the Texas Tech money bags booster potentially on this commission would suggest that this is not meant to be an anti-NIL endeavor. And I don't think there's any chance that we ever put a significant cap on compensation. I don't think there's any chance we ever get to that point in time, that big spenders will always have the freedom to spend big. I do think that there's a potential market correction coming against that. Go back and look at, like, say, the poker craze from the early 2000s. You know when the poker craze ended, if you can remember back that far? People got tired of losing. If you get into poker because it's the new hotness and you go online or you go to, casino, you sit down, you saw, Johnny Chan on TV or you watch Rounders or something like that, you're going to try your hand at poker. Well, a lot of guys, once they lose, are like, this is awful. I'm never doing this again. There is some of that in the NIL world too. We haven't seen NIL last long enough for some real market corrections because right now, every sort of, big ego booster who's willing to spend big, they all think their big expenditure is going to pay off. But once some of these don't pay off, some of these guys are going to back down the same way the poker craze ended. Some of these guys are going to be like, listen, it's not fun to spend a bunch of money and not have that pay the results that I want. My ego is not being stroked by that. So we could eventually get some sort of market correction on some of the wildest, most outlandish aspects of NIL, but it's not going to come from this presidential commission or whatever happens because of this presidential commission. But could we get this? Could we get some sort of framework, some sort of shape of a deal that would lead people to say, we're going to let you have compensation, we're going to let you have, some reasonable guidelines around transfers, but we are going to have some rules. We are going to have some roster certainty. We are going to bring an end to some of this chaos, not necessarily around compensation, which some programs would certainly love, but around, like, say, the transfer portal and the fact that day to day, week to week, you don't really know who's going to be on your team. That's the stuff that I think that could be fixed. Not because some politician swoops in and saves the day, but because all politicians, no matter what side of the aisle you're on, they just sort of recognize which way the wind is blowing. And I do think right now, it may not last forever, and it may not work out as nice and tidy as we might like. I do get the sense in this particular moment, the wind is blowing in a favorable direction to bring some of this chaos back into order. I do think so. And I don't think any one politician, no matter who it is going to be able to swoop in and save the day. But the fact that politicians are taking notice means that the public, I think, and public opinion is being recognized here a little bit more. And that's ultimately the change agent here. It's the public opinion. And I do think that people are ready to see a little order restored to college athletics. And more so than I've been in a few years, I'm actually somewhat optimistic that might happen. So if you got some feedback on that, I'd love to hear it. But for now, we'll make that cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Now, in the time we have left, let me shift gears to something completely different. We talked one of these days a few days ago about the fact that Mississippi State has a job opening for its baseball coach. And this is one of those things where if you don't follow college baseball, I don't know that you fully understand this, but Mississippi State is not a very big deal in almost any other sport, but it's a pretty big deal in baseball. Like, I think they host Ole Miss this weekend. Like, when they have one of these big series, is it Dooley Noble? Is that the name of the place? They have a great ballpark, very famous, big tailgating scene, big crowds. Like, there are a few spots in the SEC that draw big numbers for baseball, great atmosphere, great scene. One of those is Mississippi State. And, you know, even like back when I was a kid, you had like Rafael Palmeiro, Will Clark, like some of these were like really good players that kind of came through the Mississippi State program. Ron Polk, of course, one-time Georgia coach, had great success at Mississippi State, then went back to Mississippi State. Like, this is a pretty big deal in the baseball world. And they're targeting big-name coaches as their next coach. Guy from Virginia, but also potentially Wes Johnson. We said, keep your eye on this. We said this the other day. We try to sometimes tell you what's going to happen next. And this was a thing we said that was going to happen next. Keep your eye on Wes Johnson as the subject of rumors for the Mississippi State coaching open. Now, yesterday, Wes Johnson was asked about this Mississippi State job, and he gave the most like Wes Johnson answer of all time about, A, very happy at Georgia, but also B, you know, kind of going into sort of his sort of like, and he'd be the first one to say this, sort of nerd world of all the stuff that he wants to do while he's at Georgia. So certainly what we heard from Johnson yesterday about his relationship with Georgia was very positive. This is him on the subject of those Mississippi State coaching rumors. This was from yesterday.
As I love Georgia, I have no plans to venture to start. Let's just say back.
So that's him on that. He went on to talk about how, like, all this sort of like technological improvements he wants to make in terms of the pitching labs and the stuff with the hitters and things like that. He went on to talk a lot more about that. But the fact that Georgia seems to be pretty committed to allowing him to bring all that in. But the baseline answer is, love Georgia, have no plans to go to Starkville. So there you go. Simple as that, right? Maybe. Well, just to be fair and balanced, and just to give you all the information that's out there, there's a guy named Kendall Rogers. Rogers writes, he's like the main national baseball writer. You've perhaps heard of D1 Baseball. They have one of the biggest top 25. There are a lot of top 25 polls in baseball. D1 is probably the most respected, I think. D1 is probably the site that covers baseball more closely than anything because ESPN essentially just doesn't for whatever reason. But nonetheless, D1 Baseball, their big national guy, Kendall Rogers, upon seeing that quote yesterday, this is what he put on the X platform yesterday afternoon. He says about Wes Johnson and his supposed denial of interest in the Mississippi State job, Rogers writing, believe nothing and consider everything. very cryptic there. Doesn't necessarily mean anything, but at least the biggest voice in college baseball media, not, I would say, fully taking Wes Johnson at face value, that it's over and done as far as him considering the Mississippi State job. I have no reason to believe that he will take that. Just want you to know that is a topic of discussion, and we'll see where it goes from here. The good news is, if you're a Georgia baseball fan, your guy, Wes Johnson, is performing well enough at Georgia that he's getting a lot of attention in a lot of ways. They're ranked number one in the polls. They have a strong inside track on being a national seed and perhaps hosting a regional and a super regional. And we'll see what other attention, perhaps not necessarily wanted attention, comes on the heels of that. But Johnson does, though, yesterday on the record, deny interest in the Mississippi State job. And we'll let you know if anything else comes from that. Now, for our golden shoe today, we had some fun yesterday, and almost all of this coming because of our guy, Cody Chaffins. So, for whatever reason, I went into this whole thing yesterday. I didn't mean to, but we were talking about the phrase, like in recruiting, you have like the Pied Piper, the big recruit that wants other recruits wants to follow. And in doing this, I sort of demonstrated just how little, I think, folklore, I guess I understand, embarrassing myself as I frequently do. We put a little short video clip of this together yesterday. It got a pretty good response. Let me let you get a chance to see some of this because people liked it. It's making fun of me, which is always a good thing. This is from yesterday, and I enjoy this. It used to be that quarterbacks were thought of as Pied Pipers. You ever hear the Pied Piper story? Is he the thing that, like, he's the guy that drove the snakes out of Ireland? Is that right? With the flute or something? Right, I believe I'm being told it's rats, not snakes. I'm being told it's rats. So the Pied Piper, I thought it was snakes, but maybe it's rats. Either way, I believe the Pied Piper is playing a flute and driving the something out of some country, which I believe may have been Ireland. But the point is, the idea of a Pied Piper exists in recruiting, or at least it used to, of, hey, the big quarterback commits, people want to follow in the footsteps of the big quarterback. That is sort of the way that things used to be. I've been told by our incredible staff here that I've gotten the Pied Piper confused with the sort of legend of St. Patrick. St. Patrick drove the snakes out of Ireland. The Pied Piper drove rats out of Germany. I don't know what it is, like the infestations with these, sort of ancient European type deals. But today, being brought to you by Breda Pest Management, they can also drive out the critters from your home, much the same way I guess the Pied Piper once did with the rats in Germany. So if this is the first time you've ever listened to the show, then obviously you used to be the quarterbacks were thought of as impression. This is not a sophisticated show, and I am certainly not a sophisticated thinker. Upon reflection, I still kind of wonder, how come the Pied Piper is not from, like, Scotland? How come he didn't have, like, a bagpipe? It sort of feels like that's what the Pied Piper should have. But nonetheless, very funny stuff. And if you're watching on video, you saw the really funny animation that Cody put with that. Really good stuff. So we'll give Cody a golden shoe for putting that together. And also all of you that enjoyed a good laugh at my expense, we'll give you golden shoes for that too. Here's what I do know. I don't know about driving out rats and driving out snakes, but I do love driving those lousy stinking Gators out of Jacksonville each and every year. Been doing that for a long time, about 1,643 days. That's how long it's been since Florida's beaten Georgia. That is our Gator Hater Updater. Y'all have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. We will look forward to talking to you then. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, the one you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised for the price that is promised. Taking your comments here right now. We will find out what's on your mind. Let me go to DawgNation.com here first. DT says we are not in history 600 level here right now. No, we are not. No, we are not. I do like history. I'm interested in history, just not a historian. Just not a historian. UGA Marine also laughing here too. Yeah, listen, every now and then it's good to have a nice little laugh at my expense. That's always a good thing. Plus, anything that keeps me humble is also a good thing too, because Shane Holiday says there are some of us baseball nerds here in the audience. Yeah, listen, here's the thing about baseball nerds. Baseball nerds do not mind being thought of as baseball nerds. And Wes Johnson, if he'd wear a T-shirt that said baseball nerd, he'd be more than happy to wear a T-shirt that says baseball nerd. Baseball nerds do not mind being thought of as baseball nerds because getting into, like, the tedium of baseball, there's nothing more interesting than that. And I would say that I like certain aspects that I'm not always smart, like as you see from my lack of knowledge of Pied Pipers and St. Patrick, things like that, not always smart enough to be a true baseball nerd, but the kind of deep in the weeds part of baseball rewards those who watch it closely. I don't know that baseball, football can be engaged at sort of any level. You can just sort of have it on in the bar while you're drinking with friends. You can be at home and watching every snap like it's the most important thing in your life, or anything in between, and football kind of rewards you for that. There is a certain aspect of baseball where soundtrack of your summer, you kind of have the radio broadcast on as you're doing other things. I'd say baseball works pretty well at that. But the actual watching of baseball, I would say that watching baseball more closely is far more interesting than trying to watch it from a casual standpoint, because there's so much more going on than just the sort of casual observance would lead you to believe. It's one of the reasons why I'm not super in favor of pitch clock rules. I don't know that pitch clock rules, be it major leagues or college baseball, I'm not quite so sure that's making the sport better, because it's the space in between the pitching and the pitch and the whatever happens as a result of that pitch. It's the space in between where the real thinking happens. And I think for those who like baseball, that's the fun of it. Baseball rewards those who want to think deeply about sports, and, deep thinking is not always well contained within a 15-second interval. All right, let me get some YouTube comments here for a moment.
A couple things from the show today. Nothing as much fun, but here's that. You were talking about the list of the most watched games throughout the year. So here's that list, which is I love looking at. It's Georgia, Texas, obviously SEC championship #1, Georgia at Texas #2, Dogs at Alabama #4. What was that, 7? Georgia and Tennessee, and then Georgia Tech also down there, and Georgia Clemson all on the list.
Yes, I mean, Georgia does a great job of getting, in front of TV sets and getting eyeballs, but it's like, Alabama, Tennessee, which, theoretically is not it's a big game, but it's not, as big as some of these others, but draws these huge TV audiences because I think people like these SEC games. Admittedly, there's also a strong Big Ten presence on there too. They do big business with big fan bases. But if you can give us more SEC versus SEC competition, I would say that lists like this show you that's kind of what the public wants, right? Yep.
And then I think one of the other things we had talked about on all these draft shows, 13 draft picks, I think part of that is, you're in front of everybody. Dan Jackson gets the chance to show his stuff on a nationally televised game where Georgia Tech, 8.5 million people are watching. That doesn't hurt. Here's the other thing from today, the Jackson Cantwell. It didn't sound like he was like, all right, go Canes. This is responding to Bryant McKinney. It was, thank you for the insight, appreciate it. I'm going to go do something else.
That's a good point. Yeah, it's certainly gracious and polite, but it's not like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that Bryant McKinney's tweeting at me. That's actually a pretty good point on that it's not overwhelmed to be getting reached out to directly, and he doesn't seem to be especially moved by the sales pitch. That's a pretty good point too, Cody.
So those are 2 things for today.
I appreciate that. That's great stuff. Very good. G. Gray says SEC football is a moneymaker, but for now, though, it is not the biggest moneymaker in college athletics. Now, I don't care if the Big Ten makes more money than the SEC in terms of how it – I still like I just think the SEC product is better. But when you see, Michigan is using its prestige, and some of that prestige is sort of bought the old-fashioned way, to sort of silence any legitimate questions about its cheating fiasco. Ohio State spent big dollars to bring in its roster from a year ago. Penn State's trying to do the same thing right now. The fact that the Big Ten makes more money than the SEC doesn't impact the way that I feel about the SEC, but it is fair to point out that, the Big Ten is not only making more money, some of the legacy teams in the Big Ten are using that money to advance their cause. Lewis Sutherland says, I want to get excited about these recruits, but are they getting locked in with NIL deals, or is this just verbal until signing day? Is Texas or Oregon going to swoop in on us in signing day and steal these guys? I mean, I do get that, and I guess there's always been an extent to which that has been true. The one point that I have made, though, is, and look, I said this, and I know this seems like a cop-out. I would willing to believe everything or anything, and actually probably do believe nothing. So, it sort of depends on, I'm not trying to be flippant here, it sort of depends on how much do you want to let skepticism bordering on cynicism kind of control the way you think about all this. And once again, I'm not in any way diminishing the point that you're making. I have chosen to say, at a certain point, all we can do is take some of this at face value. And Jared Curtis, I would say, is a very different type of player than, like, say, Dylan Raiola, in the fact that Raiola had a deep family tie to Oregon. Coaching staff, legacy father, like deep family tie to Nebraska. That was a deep family tie to Nebraska. And that's one of those sort of things that we were told didn't really matter, but at the end, there was just going to be a big gravitational pull back towards family, especially given the fact that Nebraska had some money to spend. In the case of Curtis, the suitors for him have had a lot of money to spend, but there is no obvious tie for Curtis in some other plays. It seems like, geographically, Georgia's the closest school to his recruitment. I'm talking about in proximity. And, in listening to Curtis talk, there wasn't a lot of emotion for him in, where he wanted to go. He's like, I'll give you an example of this. He was asked about, hey, the premise of the question was, you're a Nashville guy. How important was it to you to play in the SEC? And Curtis was like, not really. I mean, it seems like it's a big deal to other people, but Jared Curtis said it's just not that big of a deal to him. I do believe, we saw her last night before the hedge was presented by Kroger, I do believe that Georgia was an emotional connection for Curtis's mom, and I'm sure just the ease of getting back and forth to seeing her son was probably a huge reason for that. And so maybe Curtis had an emotional pull to Georgia because the family had a little bit of an emotional pull towards Georgia. But the Curtis recruitment did not seem to be a very emotion-based recruitment. Whereas, like in the case of Dylan Raiola, to go to the same school your dad went to, and you got family and the coaching staff, like eventually that was just always going to be, I guess, a thing to contend with. I don't know that there's an obvious thing in place when it comes to Jared Curtis. Now, I would not guarantee, anything, but yeah, I feel pretty good about that. I'm not going to lose a lot of sleep on it necessarily for the reasons I just mentioned. But yeah, anything's sort of possible. Also, here's the one thing that, the Curtis camp made it very clear. We've done no negotiating, with Georgia about the compensation until, we've made the commitment. Some of that is just sort of a hoop you feel like you have to jump through because of some of what went on, kind of with Nico and the allegation of pay for play, which theoretically is still illegal. So you have to sort of say some of that. But we don't see a lot of big names transferring right now. Have you noticed that? In college football, whether it be Georgia or other places, you see some, but not much. Not much. Teams are locking down their guys a lot more than they did when this thing first started, and maybe a lot more than some people probably thought they were going to. So, some of why you may not see so-and-so flip right there at National Signing Day is, hey, the contract may already be signed, maybe. Mark Woodman so his son Connor is graduating from Georgia tomorrow. Connor, congratulations. What an awesome thing that is. Georgia, an incredible academic school, college years, some of the most fun and, important years of your life. To be standing there getting ready to graduate. I know that for the spring ceremony, they do an amazing, amazing presentation. It's a wonderful celebration of such a big event in your life. What a cool thing that is. Congratulations. Connor, I'm really happy. Mark, I appreciate you being in our comment section. And Connor, I'm just thrilled for your news. That's awesome. And I love when people come in here and share good news with us. And for Mark and Connor, that is certainly great news. Certainly great news. Let's see what else. Foster Moss says in about 10 years, college football may only be the Big Ten, the SEC. And look, it certainly feels like you're kind of moving in that direction. But I sort of hope it doesn't. I do. I sort of hope that somehow we hold on to whatever the Big 12 is. I think the Big 12 has actually done a pretty good job. I saw where Brett Yormark, the Big 12 commissioner, looks like he's going to be sticking around, signing a new contract. And I think given a pretty tough hand, I think he's figured some stuff out. I do. I think they're selling what they have to sell. I think they're selling it pretty well. I do. And Big 12 football is pretty fun. It's a really good basketball league. I think Yormark's doing a pretty good job. So I root for guys like that. In a weird way, I sort of root for the ACC, I guess, a little bit right now, too. I mean, I think if you compare the two non-SEC Big Ten leagues, I think it's interesting how they stand in contrast to each other. The ACC has a couple of sort of high-profile programs and a lot of other programs that don't really seem to try at all. And I still think that in the story of how we got into this mess in college athletics, one thing that we don't talk enough about is a lot of these programs, many of them are great bastions of academia. It's always a telltale sign where they are just sort of net takers. Kind of comes down to makers and takers. And there are some programs that sort of make college athletics better, and there are some others that sort of take from the pie without putting very much in. And the ACC's got a lot of the takers. I don't want to call them out by name, but we can mention Boston College and Wake Forest and a lot of these programs where you might say, what are they doing to make college athletics better? And how much of their existence about just sort of standing there waiting for the check to come in? Feels like a lot of the ACC programs, or at least the ACC has a decent number of programs. We're sort of a net negative. They're sort of a draw on the on college athletics without being much of a contributor. Whereas like the Big 12 does not really have a Clemson, Miami, Florida State type program. But boy, it's got a fairly consistent level of competition, which is not such a bad thing. Perhaps. Jeremy Harbin says that Pittsburgh should have kept George Pickens. Unfortunately, look, I mentioned this the other day. I think that Pickens, to me, is one of maybe the most entertaining Georgia player I've ever seen. I do think, in retrospect, Pickens was a lot to try to manage. I do. If I'm being honest, George Pickens was probably a lot to try to manage. In fact, we've joked about this before. Go back and rewatch, if you can find it. It's probably on our YouTube page going back a long time ago. The press conference from the 2019 Sugar Bowl after Georgia beat Baylor and Pickens had such a big game. Go back and rewatch that, how nervous Kirby was. First time Georgia ever spoken to the reporters. And, this is a different side of Kirby. He's nervous. And I think it just sort of speaks to, I don't know what this guy's going to say. Also translates into from a day-to-day, I don't really quite know what he's going to do. Pickens was a dazzling football prospect. Pretty tough to manage, I think almost anybody would say. And I think in the case of Pittsburgh, I think that's an organization that's also, I think, in any kind of an attempt to reinvent itself. I think that Pittsburgh thinks it's selling high on George Pickens right now. And I think if they thought the best football was still ahead of Pickens, he'd be wearing gold and black. The fact that he's not, I think, tells you what Pittsburgh thinks that it knows. And listen, I'll be rooting for Georgia in a Cowboys uniform. I will. But, Pittsburgh has a little bit of a history of kind of moving away from receivers at the right time. And so we'll see if that's what they're doing here when it comes to George Pickens. But honestly, one of my favorites of all time, really. But probably a pretty challenging personality to manage. Steve Self says, I'd like to see 4 major conferences. It creates better competition. I think it does. It gives college athletics a chance to be a little bit more about what it wants to be. We're so different here because we cover and care about, one of the biggest college programs. And so whatever the future of college athletics looks like, you would imagine there's going to be a place for Georgia in that discussion because of how large the following for Georgia is. Georgia's just big business. Georgia's just really, really big. But what if we were born in Ames, Iowa? What if we were Iowa State fans? Now, if you live in Ames, Iowa, there are fewer of us, but we would potentially love Iowa State as much as we love Georgia now. Just, the dirt that you're raised on just kind of becomes important to you. So if Iowa is our dirt, then that's our team. We're Georgian, so therefore Georgia is our team. Boy, the conversations we'd be having on a daily basis if this was like Cyclone Nation Daily. Just a very different conversation, And, ultimately, it's not Georgia's responsibility to kind of fund these other programs, I don't think. But the world's not better if they go away. It's just not. We've lost 2 major college programs in the last couple of years. People don't ever cover this. But at the margins, college athletics is getting smaller. And I think that ought to be noticed. Think about, it's hard to imagine what life is like in Pullman, Washington. Pullman, Washington's a long way from here, but Pullman, Washington's also kind of a long way from anything. Out on the Palouse, it's kind of like eastern part of Washington going towards Montana, way off to itself. I really don't even know. I have no picture in my mind of what, Wazoo is like. No idea. But once again, if you are from that area, you love Washington State athletics probably. And you used to be a major college program. Think about, in a Rose Bowl, what was his name? That was the quarterback, the Peyton Manning, same time Peyton Manning. I don't know. I'm getting so bad with names. I said, other quarterbacks before that, like Washington State's had, some good history. But they're not a major college program anymore. Oregon State, not a major conference program anymore. Corvallis, Oregon, gets less attention than Eugene does, but those folks love their team and just not major conference anymore. I don't know that we're better off by reducing the number of programs and schools that consider themselves major college programs. I'm not quite so sure we are. Foster Moss says, I remember we almost lost BA to Aggies Nation Daily. That never would have happened. That's funny, though. Let's see what else here we're in Facebook. Matt Rukavina says it's all mirroring the NFL now. Got to land the quarterback for the next few years and pay him handsomely. That's the strategy. But it's important to note, Matt, as we've talked about before, there are 2 strategies in the NFL, and they seem to both work equally well. If you've got a Hall of Fame level quarterback, then there's almost no amount of money that's too much to pay him. Patrick Mahomes in Kansas City, for instance. What guys like Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson are trying to be for their various, organizations. They're trying to ascend to that level. But you've got a certain kind of quarterback that could be a Hall of Famer. Therefore, you'd be wise to pay him whatever you had to. But the other thing that works is having a rookie wage scale quarterback who makes far less than his counterpart, but could give you a high enough level of performance while also giving you more money to spend on other things. I do believe there's a pretty strong corollary to that in college football too, where, hey, Jared Curtis sort of represents the college version of what we would say Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow kind of thing is, where you've got a guy you believe that can be the best quarterback. You're paying him everything you can to keep him there, and therefore you're going to just hitch your wagon to the quarterback, and as he goes, we're going to go. That's what Jared Curtis might be. But conversely, you've got Brock Purdy, at one point in time, Jalen Hurts. Some of y'all know the NFL better than I do. You've got the sort of rookie wage scale quarterback who you've all of a sudden now you've got enough money to sort of populate your entire defense and give yourself a strong running game, and you do this and you do that. And that's kind of what it sort of feels like Gunnar Stockton might be, or what Will Howard was for Ohio State a year ago, where, by finding an effective player at a somewhat bargain price, you've got more money to spend on other things. There are two templates for quarterback in the NFL, and they both work equally well. And I think the same thing is kind of true in college football too, maybe. Kent Holcomb says, love seeing only 4 road games this year, and Tennessee being the only one of much consequence. I understand where you're coming from, Kent. I do think you got to be careful here, though, a little bit. And people don't want to hear this, but I think it's true. I think there's a chance that Auburn on the road is a grizzly bear. I think there's a chance that Auburn on the road is a grizzly bear. I do. I think Auburn might be better. I think that Georgia had a tough game there in 2023, even with them not being very good. As I've said a couple of times here, I'm not convinced that this somewhat, has been described in the media, easier Georgia schedule is actually going to be all that easier this year if teams like Auburn and Florida are improving. I'm just not sure it will be. And like the one thing in the Hugh Freeze era that has been an interesting departure is, Auburn has always played great at home. In the Hugh Freeze era, they have not done as much of that. But if they are improving, that's the first thing you'll notice, is they'll go back to being just lights out at Jordan-Hare Stadium. Because at various times, and I don't take pleasure in saying this, but honesty compels me to admit, at various times, Auburn's home field advantage has almost been unmatched in the SEC. I'm talking about in terms of wins and losses. I'm not talking about like who had the best like sound system or who had the loudest crowd. But the fact that if you look at Auburn's home game performances compared to its road game performances, the splits on Auburn are about as wide as any team. That's been less true in the Hugh Freeze era. They just haven't really been good anywhere. But I do think y'all ought to circle that game. I do. And we've had a nice feel-good show. We're in a good mood. But I think you got to be careful about that game. Deborah Guy says, you never know it when you play at Jordan-Hare. Crazy things happen there. Yeah, that is indeed the case. Philip Jordan Wells says we'd be doing DawgNation Daily. I feel like I would do well. Now, Georgia's got a great agricultural, history too. But one of those, like, Nebraska, Iowa State, something like that, I feel like I would do well in one of those sort of, like, very agricultural-based communities. I like rural environments. Let's see what else. Let's get a couple more comments. G. Gray says, the Bama fan says, I'm scared of playing at South Carolina Auburn this year. We're going to lose one of those games. Yeah, that's 2 tough road games. And 2 stadiums that are pretty loud. The Alabama-South Carolina game a year ago is one of those that sort of gets forgotten because we didn't know at the time how good South Carolina was going to turn out to be. Spencer Clark says Auburn is your rival anyway. Yeah, a couple of years ago, Hugh Freeze didn't want to treat Georgia like a rivalry. We'll see if now he feels like he has a good enough team to sort of make this be a rivalry game again. What else is going on here? John Main says, is the 1650 for the countdown for Gator Hater the longest it's been since the show started? I believe so. And by the time we get to the actual game up above 1800, that's the longest it's been for Georgia in, is it like 40 years or something like that? I think it's the longest in like 40 years. Georgia would have beaten them, I think, 80, 81, 82, and 83. I think lost in 84. This would be the longest it's been in like 40 years. All right, let's help Brodo Baggins here. So I'm on the golf course. I need 3 songs to play to enhance my game. Anything helps. Well, I mean, I love Baba O'Reilly, the Georgia song. It's the song from The Who, but it's the song that Georgia plays right before kickoff. If I'm trying to get fired up, little Baba O'Reilly sort of always helps me. Like every now and then, if I'm dragging a little bit in the morning for whatever reason, little Baba O'Reilly always kind of gets me fired up. Sort of think about the crowd and things like that. That's always a pretty good one for me. What else gets you fired up? I would say that's my first suggestion right there. Maybe the audience got a couple of other suggestions too. RKD's got a sort of Jeremy Harbin is also right there with me. Lance D gives you the back in black, which would certainly kind of do the job. But I would say that like your level of sort of like golf fired upness is a little different than like, back in black's great for like a workout or something like that. By the way, did y'all see Metallica played last night, speaking of rock music, at Lane Stadium in Virginia, in Blacksburg, Virginia. They always kind of do the run out to Enter Sandman. They played in Blacksburg last night at Lane Stadium. Saw some of the video. It's a really cool thing to see. I'd love to see Georgia host more concerts in Athens. I think that's really fun. And it seems like Metallica was a real crowd pleaser last night at Lane Stadium. That's a really cool thing. That's a really cool thing. Greg Baker says, if you like rural, check out Nicaragua. I would like to check that out. I would like to see that. I have not done nearly enough international travel. I've been all over the Caribbean, of course, y'all know that. But I have not done enough international travel. It's one of those things I need to fix as I get a little older. I just sort of feel like it'd be nice to see more of the world as a way of understanding the world. I need to do more of that. Third Will says, listen to some of those Kirby halftime speeches. That gets me. Yeah, that's always a good thing. Sometimes when believe it or not, I know I don't look like it, but I do try to exercise a little bit. Sometimes when I'm in the gym, I'm on the elliptical, I'm kind of dragging a little bit. Like a lot of times what I like to do is I'll go on YouTube and I'll like pull up Georgia plays from history, or, sort of the pregame opening reactions and things like that, stadium atmosphere. I like a lot of that kind of stuff. Rambo says, as he's doing this right now, driving from Deadwood down to Cheyenne. This is in Wyoming. Beautiful, but a whole lot of nothing. And Dad wouldn't let me turn off to visit the hole in the wall. He said the authorities would find 4 skeletons in our Delta 88. That's funny. I guess he's referencing back when he's younger. Yeah, like I've never been to like the Dakotas and like Montana, Wyoming, big sky country out there, Idaho, up there, into Wyoming. I've never done any of that. I'd love to do that. Love to see that. DT says Cole Kublik has Georgia's offensive line ranked number 1 in the SEC. That's really interesting. Because that's obviously going against what a lot of Georgia fans sort of think right now. Pretty interesting. What else? So Rambo says he had a friend that drove from Eugene to Pullman. It's just hours of driving through wheat fields. I can imagine that's true. I can imagine, like some drives are really, I told you the story a year ago about how we had to drive up to Cooperstown for my son. That drive was gorgeous. That was a gorgeous drive. Not a drive we had planned on making. We just end up having to do it. That was a gorgeous drive. Central Virginia into the sort of farmlands of Pennsylvania, into the mountainous area of New York. Just gorgeous. I had no idea that part of the country was so pretty. And I'm a guy who likes to drive. I've told you that before. I enjoy a good road trip. I enjoy driving. But there are some drives you take that are not pretty. People tell you, like driving through West Texas, for instance. You get on like the other side of the major population centers. It's pretty much the same for a very long time. And it sounds like the drive from Eugene over to Pullman kind of the same way. And I can imagine that's true. Eugene Marine, Ryan Leaf. I'm telling you right now, I told y'all before I want to do this show until I'm 80. By the time I'm 80, I'm not going to remember anybody's name because I'm already losing Ryan Leaf, and I was a college kid when Leaf was playing at Washington State. Was it Tim Rosenbach before that? Tim Rosenbach was a very good quarterback. Now, why I remember Rosenbach, don't remember Ryan Leaf. It just goes to show you the weird synapses inside my head. But yeah, it used to be major college athletics, and now it's sort of not. That's also where Gardner Minshew went to great fame too. So they've had a pretty good little history of quarterbacks there. All right, we got to go. Fun stuff. y'all check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised, the price is promised. You can trust them on all of that. Warm weather's here. Get your AC unit tuned up to factory fresh specs. RS Andrews can help you out with that. Or if you got a plumbing emergency, let's say your water heater goes out. In any case, RS Andrews can replace that for you the same day. You just need to find them online at rsandrews.com. You'll have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. We'll close out the week strong. We'll see you there for it. 10 a.m. tomorrow, everybody. We'll talk to you then.